Today, I have a very special guest with me to help educate us and raise awareness about health and safety in professional sports. I am pleased to welcome JC Tretter. JC is the president of the National Football League's Player Association. Hey there, this is Felice, and you're listening to Work It, the only podcast where we get honest about your situation at work. See, I believe that work can affect our whole person, including our personal lives and, yes, even our health. My goal is to leave you empowered, encouraged, and energized in your everyday work life. So pull up because here is where the real orientation begins. So today, I have a very special guest with me to help educate us and raise awareness about health and safety in professional sports. I am pleased to welcome JC Tretter. JC is the president of the National Football League's Player Association. Welcome, JC.
Thanks for having me.
So, JC, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you have this wonderful background, and I don't want to butcher it. So tell us, who is JC Tretter?
So I graduated from Cornell with a degree in industrial labor relations, then was drafted in the NFL, played 9 years, 4 for the Green Bay Packers, 5 for the Cleveland Browns. Retired 2 years ago, but during my playing career, became president of the NFL Players Association. And I'll be coming up on my 4th year in that role in March of next year.
Wow. Congratulations. I think it's quite rare that you hear of someone who played in the NFL or any sports league who actually went to school for labor and industrial relations. I think that's why I think you're just so cool and awesome, and why I think we have some great things in common. So, JC, what made you want to hold a position in the NFLPA?
It was something I always was passionate about with my schooling. And originally I was probably considering going to law school, but Cornell lets you kind of choose how you go through your your back 2 years of college. So you kind of pick your own major almost. And ILR is known for human resources, unions, and legal. So I kind of went down the middle of law classes and union classes. So it was always something I was interested in. As I got older in the league, I always knew I wanted to get more involved with the PA. And then once I got to the back end of my career and I felt really stable and I kind of figured out how to be a professional athlete, I needed to decide how involved I wanted to be. And my personality is more, if I'm gonna get involved, I'm gonna get all the way involved. So one of the off seasons right before the 2020 rep meeting, I decided I was going to run for president, kind of go all in and want to be totally involved in all of the issues.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, so folks who don't know, the Players Association is the union that represents the NFL players, and that's all the players, right? That's not just a team of players or players for a particular club. That's all the players, right?
Correct. So we've got about 2,200 active members across all the different teams. And then you're also negotiating on behalf of the 28,000 former players who benefits we still hold, as well as all future players. So we kind of have 3 groups that we talk about. We've got the current, former, and future players that we're negotiating for and representing and trying to add value to. But we're the same as any union. We're fighting for the same things: wages, benefits, and working conditions. And it might look a little different, but it's all the same to us. And we realize it's still a workplace, though there are a ton of cameras and fans and games being played. It is still a workplace that we're fighting for the same rights and protections as any other workplace.
Absolutely. And I think a big distinction here is that a lot of unions don't represent former employees anymore, with rare exceptions. So that's actually something that's pretty cool that you guys are actually involved in the lifespan of a player, really. So JC, what are some of the issues that come up in the space of wages, hours, terms and conditions of employment? And I ask that because I think we forget, or people forget, that the players are employees. They are professional athletes, but they are employees, and the clubs that employ them are employers or management. So what are some of the issues that come up in that space?
Yeah, so we have probably a 2,000-page CBA that outlines how everything works, how discipline works, how wages work, what the minimum salary is. In the previous CBA we signed in 2020, if you kind of take off each bucket, wages wise, we raised the minimum salaries for all players on minimum, which is about 60% of our membership are on minimum salaries who got a 20% raise. Those, by the end of the CBA in 2030, the minimum salary will be over $1 million. So every current player will be making $1 million, which is awesome. Then you go to benefits. We pride ourselves in having one of the best benefits packages in the world: a pension, 401k, a ton of different cap plans and annuity plans. And we realize that our careers are short, and we want to make sure we put as much money to the back end of our lives, that we have money coming into players later on as possible. And then we look at what we did for former players, like you just pointed out. We went back and we gave all players a pension boost. So former players increased their pensions retroactively. For 700 players, there used to be a 4-year vest. You needed to play 4 years to have a pension. We went back and decreased it to 3 years because that's what it currently is now. So 700 players who were not qualified for a pension now have qualified for a pension, which is great. 4,400 players we gave a $50,000 HRA account to help with health reimbursement. So we really try to help the benefits as much as possible, because that's something everybody needs. And no matter how much money you made during your career, it treats everybody equally. So you can be the star quarterback making $50 million, but we want to make sure everybody gets paid the same amount in benefits. And then lastly, for the working conditions, that's really the health and safety.
Push pause, because I know, JC has a lot for us, y'all. So, JC, I think what you said just a moment ago is really key, because people hear $1 million and they're like, well, make $1 million. I mean, you raise a minimum of $1 million, but this is a very risky sport, right? There's a lot of risk. Players go in at a very young age. And so when we think about the amount of risk involved and what can happen to a player, and we think about the pay, then it seems like it's on par, at least in my view. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because even you yourself, you started in the league quite young.
Yeah, so these are 22, 21, 20-year-old young men who start in this league, and the lifespan is short. It's 3 to 4 years is the average career. So you're in it very quickly. We have a 100% injury rate. If you play this sport, you're going to get hurt. I look at myself. I'm now 32. I played 9 years in the league. I had probably 5 or 6 major surgeries while I played. I will have more to come for sure. I'll probably need to get my knees replaced later on in life. I think other than that, I had a full ankle. I broke my ankle in 3 places, tore all the ligaments off of it. So it comes with a cost too. And when I ran for president in 2020, that was one of the things I talked a lot about. We're obviously into the negotiations of the CBA, but what I really focused my candidacy on was this idea that for the last couple decades, players had to choose to kind of sacrifice the second half of their life for the first half of their life to play football and take on that risk and take on the injuries. They had a really rough second half of their life. And what I told the guys when I ran was my focus is trying to change that and try to make this game safer, try to make sure we protect our players long term so guys can play this game, make a lot of money, have all the fun things they've always wanted to do being a professional athlete, but then they can play with their kids and can play with their grandkids and make sure they're not kind of sacrificing that part of life to play football. So that's kind of been my goal and one of my passions.
Amen to that. And not only play with their kids and grandkids, but also, many of them are husbands. And many of the players are active in their communities as well. That's something I learned from you just recently.
Yeah, we do a bunch of awards about community service, and as we were just talking about how young guys are, it is amazing how quickly they grow up and how quickly they decide to be involved in their local communities and put a ton of resources behind it. We've got guys organizing benefits for 10, hundred thousands of dollars going into their local communities. A lot of them have passions about, things they want, whether it's childhood obesity, whether it's, poor neighborhoods and wanting to give back because they came from that and they want to try to solve that. So there's so much really amazing work that our players do. And we've talked about it before about almost giving some of these young guys grace. They're 23 years old and they're going to make some mistakes. But if you look at the things that don't always get the attention of the media, the things they're doing on the side to kind of make changes for the better in their communities, there's a lot of really great work being done by these young men who have made a lot of money but are trying to give back to help other people, which is phenomenal.
JC, when I was preparing for this conversation and doing some research, and you and I have met on other occasions and had conversations, two things kept coming up in my spirit. One is just respect for everybody in this business and respect for what you're doing, and love. When I say love, I'm not talking about gushy, kind of like you squishy, squashy love. I'm talking about love beyond just love of the game. Love that extends to the players involved in the game and their lives, right? And love for those who are even in management because they need each other. Everybody in this space, everybody needs each other in order to carry on this great American tradition of the sport of football, which is now, entertainment as well for many.
Yeah, it's something, and when you start with respect, I think that goes back to kind of the union side of it, where a couple years ago, we were out in LA for the Super Bowl, and we try to do some other union activations with whether somebody's on strike or has an issue. We try to lend our voice and our platform. And I remember the Rich Foods was on strike, their workers, and they, right after COVID, I mean, they were the ones making all the little cakes and pastries that people were buying in COVID. And they were on strike for $1 an hour more. And it was mostly non-English speaking women who were working in these factories who said, we're going to be on strike because we want $1 an hour more. And that's what respect looks like to us. And I thought it was so powerful going to that picket line and picketing with them because that's
wait. So the players picketed with the workers who make food and that are not even part of the league?
Yeah, so our staff and I, we try to do that every year for the Super Bowl, wherever the location is. We try to then go and lend our voice and our platform and bring some of our other players and executive committee members to go and help and picket. We did it for Starbucks in Phoenix last year. It's something we try to very much be involved with the greater labor movement. And though it's sometimes different, I think the more we come together and workers come together and understand what each is going through and a lot of times push everybody forward, right? Like sometimes you look and say, well, they already have all of those things. So I don't care, whatever their struggles are. I don't want to hear it because it's better than what I have. But that's not really the goal. The goal is that we push everybody up. Everybody gets more. We continue to push for everybody getting what they deem as respect. So I think that word means a lot to me. And then the love aspect you hit on, this is something that we're all kind of in together. And the only way this ecosystem works with players and management, the team owners, the coaches, a lot of the issues we face, if we work together on them, it's going to make everybody's job easier. When you look at health and safety, the getting players healthy for the games is better for the players because they're not injured. It's better for the coaches because now they have healthy players to coach. It's better for the owners because they're paying them money, and if they're hurt, they're paying them not to play. And that's better for the fans who pay all the money to see the great players in the world play. So really, like, those are the issues that there's no reason to be adversarial about. It really is trying to find common ground and come to the right conclusions, because if you do it right, everybody gets what they want out of the situation.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is why I think JC needs to just become a lawyer and get in this space with me. So, very, very key. I've represented management most of my career, but I always lead with dignity and respect. Everybody needs to feel dignified in what they do, and everybody needs to feel respected and heard. Even those lawyers who are still employees somewhere, want to feel respected and dignified in what they do. So I think that's a universal language. Everybody wants that dignity and that respect. So I hear you 100% on that. JC, let's just dive into some of the spaces where you have actually made quite an impact, which is, health and safety. And can you tell us about some of the things that you have done and accomplishments you've had, especially over the COVID pandemic and what you're working on now?
Yeah, the COVID I think is a huge issue. I was elected 3 days before the country shut down, so I was elected not really realizing that was going to be what I spent my first 2 years as president trying to figure out. And I remember when I was flying home from rep meeting, I had a call from our executive director, and he was like, "Hey, I know we usually bring the new president to the office, get him to meet the staff, and get to know everybody and get onboarded. You're not going to have time to do it. I think this is going to get really bad really quickly, and we might not play football this year." So, I got elected, and that was my first taste of being president. Was you're going to have to kind of solve a once in a century pandemic and figure out how football can be played safely. So we've spent the next 4 or 5 months figuring out how we can return to work safely, both from a COVID perspective of testing cadences, social distancing, which for our sport is really unique. It's a contact sport, and we're talking about social distancing and how to keep people safe. So putting all protocols around that, but also we had cities shut down completely, so guys weren't able to train and work out. So the other health and safety part of COVID was how do we get these premier athletes to return to top condition after not being able to train for a long time. And what we had seen previously was after a long break, when you return to work, your risk of injury skyrockets. So we wanted to make sure we put a plan in place where those players could come back to a safe work environment from the pandemic, but also weren't going to walk into a ton of new injuries because they were coming back without being able to train for such a long time because of COVID. And we were able to do that, which I don't think many people thought we were going to be able to pull off in the time.
When you talk about starting a new role at the beginning of the pandemic, of the shutdown, I can relate to that 100%. I started a new role, a new job. The first day of the shutdown, it was, we're going to mail your computer to you. And then it was, how in my space, it was, how do we help employers respond in this pandemic and secure safe workplaces, etc. And you still had to maintain your composure. You still had to be a professional. You still had to look after the needs of another, as opposed to only looking out for your own needs. So I think I want to just name that for everybody, that, if you were someone who started a new role at the beginning of the shutdown or the beginning of the pandemic, and your job was to look out for the interests of other people, I just want to give everybody a round of applause on that, because I don't think we extend enough grace and appreciation for people who took on those new roles, because that was something that we never experienced and probably never will in our lifetime again, fingers crossed, right? So to step into that and still be a leader and lead through that, I mean, I'm just going to put a capital on all those letters in the word respect to you, JC, and to everybody who found themselves in that role. So let's dive more into the health and safety space, which is, something that you're really passionate about. And I know that there are some critical areas that include head injuries, lower extremity injuries, heart health, and mental health. And I know that the Players Association and the NFL have been partnering to address many of these issues. And there are many, many, many committees, but there are 2 joint labor management committees. Can you tell us about those committees and the work you're doing?
Yeah, so we have I guess let's take a giant step back. How we look at it, it is the employer's job to provide a safe workplace for the employees. It is our job as a union to hold them accountable to do that. We have joint committees spelled out in the CBA where we have representation from both sides. We've got reps from the union, and not only union reps, but also experts. So I think that's something we do really well. Is it's not, putting a lawyer in the room and having a lawyer be an expert in head, neck, and spine, or lower extremities, or heart health. It's going out.
No, they will try, but go ahead.
It's about going out and finding actual experts in those fields and bringing them in to represent the needs of the players and having the players' voice involved, making sure we're having the actual experts. And that was something we did with COVID really well, was we had the infectious disease experts on our committees to make sure we were making the right decisions and not having a bunch of athletes and lawyers debating about how to keep people safe from the pandemic when they don't know all the science. So we do a ton of that. The league has a ton of committees too. A lot of it's spelled out in the CBA of what is and isn't joint. And then in the end, it's not all mandatory. A lot of them are recommendations. So it's the goal of, or the job of the primaries, myself as president, our executive director, Roger Goodell and his staff, to come together with those joint recommendations and figure out how it works. So there's a ton we can dive into. We can take it off in chunks, however you want to do it. But that's kind of the overall look at it. We have these joint committees. They give recommendations. They're filled with experts from both sides. And then it's the job to negotiate off of those and make sure we come to the right conclusions and how the world of football works.
Yeah. So, first of all, let me say some lawyers will try. We don't, some of us do know our limitations. I know that I am not a, heart doctor or a neurologist. I know that I know my limitations. I know that I'm very good in this traditional labor space, and that's what I can do.
Yeah.
Right. So with that, JC, how important is it to have neutrals in terms of those who are representing or giving advice or guidance to the league and the Players Association in order to make those recommendations?
Yeah, I think we want experts. I think we go, whenever you say the word neutral, the first thing that comes to mind is our concussion protocols. Mm-hmm, so when we first designed the concussion protocols, they got passed in 2014. And now, if you want to look at concussions as a whole, when they started being an issue was probably from the beginning of, players or anybody having impacts with their head. And it took a really long time for the league to acknowledge the relation between head impacts and CTE and the sport of football itself. And in 2011, there was a lawsuit with former players suing the league about these issues, about kind of covering up the connection between head injuries and the impact. And now we know a lot more now than we did back then. I'm sure there is still a ton we don't know about the risks of head injuries in playing football, which is why we have joint committees studying it with the best experts in the world. But in those concussion protocols, we designed a way to try to keep the players safe. So we wanted to make sure that players who received head injuries during games were being monitored and taken out. And part of that is changing the culture of athletes, where for a long time players looked at it as I'm seeing stars, I blacked out for a second, I lost my equilibrium, but I'm going to keep playing because it's like having a sprained ankle. And I play through a sprained ankle, so I'm going to play through whatever's going on in my head. And it took a lot of re-education for guys to understand that's not the same thing. A sprained ankle and a concussion are not the same thing. And your ankle will recover, your brain may not. So the joint education was important, but then we looked at it. We shouldn't have doctors from the teams being in charge of deeming who has a concussion or who doesn't, because they might be the best doctors in the world. They might have all the right intentions, but there is some bit of, wires going cross there when they're employed by the team who wants the player on the field, but they represent the player as a medical decision, and where are their allegiances actually going to lie. So we push to have neutral, independent neurologists on every sideline. So when a player gets hit, they are flagged, they are alerted, and they go through a concussion evaluation from the neutral doctor for them to deem whether they have a head injury or not. So whenever you say the word neutral, that's the first thing in health and safety that comes to my mind, is the work we've done around concussions. And there's a ton of more work to be done. but I am proud over the last decade plus of how much has changed, both in the culture of athletes, but also what we've put into protocols to make sure we keep those athletes safe.
Yeah, so my understanding, and I think I got this from the NFL website, is that it says that, the 2021 preseason, including practices and games, had the lowest rate of concussion in the last 5 years.
Yeah, so that ties to technological advancements too. So one, we are pushing new helmets. We have a committee that looks at the helmets that everybody wears, and they lab test them year over year. Those lab tests rate every helmet, and then we ban the low performing helmets. So you're not allowed to wear those helmets. And we're trying to push guys to use only the best of the best helmets, while also pushing the helmet manufacturers to continue to innovate and design better helmets to make sure they're passing these standards. So that's the first step. The second, this kind of goes.
Wait, can I push pause on that really quick? Because I have a question. So, okay, for the helmets, who decides what helmets the players wear? Okay, so you narrow it down to the ones that you feel meet your safety standards, and then of that that group, like, who decides what helmets the players actually wear?
The player picks. So the teams have a ton of different options you can pick from. Before they could pick any helmet they wanted. Now they are barred from picking the low performing helmets. They only have the green or yellow helmets, the OKs and greats, and we push them to the greats. So the player gets that choice. And then for the standards, it's kind of the labs, the experts, the head, neck, and spine doctors that go through the studies to make sure we're picking the right helmets.
Fantastic. Okay, so you were making another point besides the helmet.
Yeah, so the other thing that's gone in conjunction is these Guardian caps, which it's still early. We've only used them for 2 years, but we've seen a decrease in concussions while using these Guardian caps, which are almost foam pads that go over the hard shell of the helmet. And players use those during practice. We have seen a decrease in practice concussions during training camp. We have not seen a decrease during the games when they take the head or the Guardian caps off and they play with the hard shells again. So that's something we continue to monitor to make sure, causation and correlation match up, and it's not just a data issue. But again, that's another potential technological advancement that is keeping players safe. So in the end, the struggle we face is concussions at their core is just about force, mass times acceleration. And the players are getting bigger and bigger every year and still getting faster and faster every year. So we kind of have this barreling train going forward of these athletes becoming bigger, faster, and stronger, which then means the force behind every contact is higher, which is then a leading cause of concussions. So, trying to keep up the technological advancements and the health and safety with kind of this never-ending cycle of really great athletes coming in is one of the big struggles.
And, this is high tech, folks. Like, this is high tech stuff. I mean, I learned so much from JC, and I learned so much from going to the NFL's website. I mean, there is just a lot of technology, a lot of time, a lot of experts, a lot of effort that goes into player safety. If you're curious, I encourage you to go to the NFL website. And do you have stuff up on the association's website as well?
Yeah, I'm sure we do. I try to write even columns, like as I have a President's Corner where I write columns breaking down some data. So whether it's soft tissue injuries or concussion protocols, I try to cut through the science jargon and write it in ways that normal people would talk about the issues and understand. So they're really kind of written for the players, but I think fans can read them and understand what we're talking about, what the issues are, and get to know kind of the data a little bit better.
Oh, excellent. Hopefully you have that page address so that people can go check that out. All right. And we will put that down in the chat of this podcast. And please be sure to like this video and subscribe. Forgot to say that earlier, so got to put that out there. So JC, you talked about your own lower extremity injuries earlier. And when I think about that, that's just a lot. And so that's another area that the association and the NFL are I can't speak, to partnering on to address these injuries. So can you talk about the lower extremity injuries and how serious they are and what's being done in that space?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about lower extremity injuries, I think the next step is missed time injuries. So, how long it takes for a player to come back. So, you have significant injuries, which are kind of some of the things I went through: broken legs, torn meniscuses, where I had to have surgery. Those lead to a ton of missed time, missed games, which doesn't help the player. The player wants to be out there playing, wants to be healthy, and the team also wants them playing as well. Then you also have lower extremity soft tissue injuries, which aren't completely preventable, but there's a lot more we can be doing, because when you look at the data around lower extremity injuries, soft tissue wise, once you have the first one, it then skyrockets your likelihood of having it return again. So if you get a hamstring injury in training camp, your odds are much higher to have another hamstring injury later in the year that causes you to miss more time. So the focus has to be on avoiding that first injury, to then decrease the likelihood of corresponding injuries later on. So that comes to a lot of science about ramp up, how to bring players back into training camp. We've done a lot of changes to the training camp structure. There used to be 2-a-days, which means people were practicing twice a day. And guys were having huge soft tissue injuries, and we've continued to look at that ramp. How we do the off season is a big point of contention, and if there's a better way to do the off season training to make sure guys are prepared. If you look at from a fan's perspective, I believe out of the last 5 Super Bowl champions, 4 of the 5 have been deemed kind of a top 5 healthy team out of training camp. So if you get through training camp healthy and you do the right things physically to keep your players from having these soft tissue injuries, you have a higher likelihood of then winning games because your players are healthier. So there's, again, when we talk about this ecosystem, it helps everybody. Players are healthier, the coaches can coach healthy players, the fans get to watch them, and they're going to win more. So everybody should be on the same page of trying to find the best way to do that.
Can I say amen and repeat that? Because I think sometimes in my space, I come across either, one side or the other, whether it's management, whether it's labor, folks who don't think that the relationship requires reciprocity and shared interests, right? We have shared interests and we have to meet the needs of each other if we want the organization to go forward. It can't be all my way, can't be all your way. We're going to have to find some middle ground, but there are a lot of folks who don't get that on both sides. I get it and you get it. So that's that's I think a good chunk of the battle. So JC, the NFL website says that hamstring injuries are the most common injuries suffered by the players and are the second most burdensome injury in the league, with 75% of those injuries resulting in missed time.
Yep. Yeah, so you look at, I believe the first is probably ACLs, and there's way fewer ACL injuries, but the time it takes to get back are 9 to 12 months. So even though there's few, you're missing an entire year of time. Hamstrings or lower extremity soft tissues are next. And though the recovery time is shorter, there are so many more, and they almost lead to additional ones. They cause so much missed time. And then when you look at missed time, what that means to the player. So the player who in training camp is fighting for a job, as I said earlier, careers 3 to 4 years. So you're kind of always on that bubble of, is my time up? You get hurt in training camp and you're fighting for a job and you then can't perform. Your career is probably over. So, this isn't hey, I got a hamstring injury, I'm out 3 weeks. And the team's like, all right, sounds good. See you in 3 weeks. Team usually is like, you're gone. We're cutting you. You're out and your career's over. So like for a player's perspective, fixing or creating the most safe environment for them to train and come back so they don't get hurt and they can actually let their performance speak for whether they make the team and not their, a fluke injury. So critical. But yeah, the missed time thing is big, because those are, you get one in training camp, you miss a little time, then 4 weeks later you get another one because it causes a higher likelihood. You miss 4 games, then you come back and you miss another one. And those 4 games you miss, we also have looked at a ton of science on how do you bring a guy back from an injury. If we already know they're at an increased odds of re-injury, how do you make sure they get trained in those 4 weeks off while they're recovering so they can come back and hopefully not get hurt again? So there's a ton of science and data and doctors involved in those discussions to make sure the guys are prepared the right way to return as well.
Absolutely. And again, going back to that love of the game, for these guys, I mean, most, if not all, this is what they love to do.
Mhm.
So, folks, I want us to contextualize that. Imagine not being able to do what you love to do because you were injured. And some folks were just blessed enough. I know I have been blessed enough to be able to do what I love to do as my profession, right? And so for these guys, it's more than just work. This is what they love to do. If this is what they want to do above all else. So making sure that they are able to do this and maintain their livelihood is really important.
Yeah, and we understand what guys are willing to do to play too. So, like I said earlier, 100% injury rate. I know from personal experience. I played half a season on a torn meniscus where like my knee was torn, and I played the rest of the year because I felt like I still could, even though I was in pain. The back 2 years of my career, my knees would swell because I was bone on bone in my knees, and I couldn't sleep for like the first 3 days of the week. So I would finish the game on Sunday, my knees would blow up. I couldn't bend them; they'd throb, and I wouldn't be able to sleep most nights. And then Thursday evenings, we'd have to drain them with a needle. We'd have to pull the fluid out of my knees just so I could start walking again later in the week. So guys go through a tremendous amount of pain and suffering. Our job is to decrease that. But when we go back to that first discussion about how much guys make, you're right. There is a significant trade-off to that life. There is pain. Yes, we accept it. Yes, we somewhat decide. I could have sat out. I could have not played. But to your point, we do love playing. We do want to be there for our teammates who have put so much work in. We want to make sure we are out there with them too. So that's kind of the psyche of professional athletes. They take on a lot of pain and suffering to go out there and play and make this money. And then we try to protect them as best we can.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of investment. Even before they are drafted, there's just a lot of investment even working up to that point, right? All the training, all the discipline, diet discipline, exercise discipline, showing up discipline, like all the discipline and sacrifice involved in just getting to the point of being drafted by a professional team, right? And to have that compromise because you got injured during practice is like, again, going back to that word grace, extending grace and understanding holistically everything that this player has really invested in this career and what that really means.
Absolutely.
And I promise you, I'm not an advocate for the. Yeah. But what I am is I'm human, and I'm a human. I believe in humanity, and I believe in dignity and respect, right? And we should be able to get that in the work that we do, and we should be able to be safe. I want to be safe, right? We want our family and our kids to be safe. So I think everybody can relate to that. So, JC, I can't imagine that anyone would think this, but somebody always does something that we can't imagine in this day in age. What about those who say, listen, they assume the risk. They signed up for this. I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for a nice desk job, and so I don't get injured on that job. They signed up for these very risky careers. That doesn't mean that they should have more advantages than anybody else.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that's a small percent of people that think that. I think a lot of people think that. I think that goes back to my comments earlier about pushing everybody to have better. And there are things that we have that maybe another workplace doesn't, and that workplace has two options. They can look at us and say, you have enough, you don't deserve any more. Or they can look at us and say, you want to know what, you deserve as much as you can get through negotiation, through your fights. And I think it's the same thing. We have certain things that other workplaces have certain things that we don't have that we would like. That doesn't mean we look at another workplace and say, they have enough. When we go to picket lines to fight for other people to make sure they get more. Like that's the whole, I think when you look at a labor management dynamic, the pot that's out there, the pie that's out there, how it's split and what protections you have and you can fight for, that's the conversation of how much can you get and make sure your guys are protected, both monetarily, benefits, working conditions, the health and safety part. Yes, we assume risk. Yes, we play with these injuries, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop trying to make it safer and make our guys healthier, because they're going to leave this game at 25, 26, 27-year-olds with hopefully 50, 60, 70 years left to live. And we want to make sure those 50, 60, 70 years are productive and they're happy and they're healthy. So that fight never ends, making sure we're trying to provide that to the players.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, JC, can we talk about the heart health work that the association and the NFL are doing? I know that there are different types of heart health issues, or issues that result in a player maybe losing consciousness or going into cardiac arrest or some other heart malfunction or neurological malfunction out on the field. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's one of the things we screen for in all of our physicals. So we do EKGs, we make sure we check heart health early in training camp and flag any issues. We had one really big case last year of commotio cordis with a player from the Buffalo Bills who got hit in the sternum. It's like a very rare issue, and he went into cardiac arrest during a game. And those are things you can't prevent always, but you can make sure you're prepared for. And that's kind of what we've looked at our job as a union, is make sure we're prepared. So when that player went down at the most pivotal time in his life, legitimately a life or death situation, we had 3 of the best resuscitation doctors in the world within 40 yards of him. That's preparation. And before every game, those first responders go through every type of scenario of how do we go, who takes the lead, how do we get them to the hospital, we make sure every stadium has a trauma 1 hospital nearby. So there's a quick path to a level 1 or a level 1 trauma center where they can do any type of procedure needed in those situations. That is all preparedness. And I think when you go to the heart health, that's one of the big ones. We had that very scary case. And when you talk about assuming risk, it hit our guys really, really hard. That took a while for guys to get over, because we do somewhat assume risk and know what we're getting ourselves into. We understand we're going to have knee and ankle injuries. We're going to have shoulders and hips and different things that are going to be bruised and battered the rest of our lives. The heart's not one guys think about. So when that happened, I know a lot of guys had to take a couple days to kind of wrap their head around what they saw, because it's not something they had seen before. It was not something they had considered happening to them. And they almost have to adjust their understanding. And we had calls with families and significant others too, because they have to wrap their head around that too, where they hadn't thought about going to a game and seeing their husband or their dad go through that. So that's, again, that's the work that we have to do as a union, to make sure that our players at their most pivotal moment have every protection and safety standards set in place, that they make it out. And this player did survive, now is back playing football, but a very scary situation in the moment.
Absolutely. And scary for those of us, the viewers, who were home watching this. Very scary. And we don't want to see that. It's not healthy for us either. And it's not healthy for our children who are watching on the television show or set, or whatever we want to call what we watch TV on these days, a phone, a tablet, whatever, is that we don't want to see traumatic things like that, right? Because again, this is a family sport. This is a American tradition. And so we want to feel good about our kids and our loved ones watching this and actually having a great celebratory experience. So, JC, you talked about those professionals who are on the sidelines. And can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because it's extraordinary, the amount of medical support that is on the sidelines. And we don't see that when we're just watching TV. And sometimes these guys are just dressed like maybe they're part of the coach team or whatever. They're not necessarily out there with a stethoscope and a white coat on, right? So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so every team has their doctors and their trainers. They've got trainers, they have physical therapists, they have orthopedic doctors. So when a guy gets hurt, you see kind of 6 people running onto the field. They've got kind of everybody represented out there to see what the issue is and what they need. And then you have also the emergency care. You have an ambulance, you have all the first responders, you then have these resuscitation doctors, you have independent neurologists. I mean, we've got almost this whole core of medical professionals on these fields ready to deal with any type of situation that provides itself. And again, like I said, they run through the checklist before every game to make sure they're all on the same page of who's in charge, who does what, how do we get this situation taken care of. Because you never know when it's going to arise, when something's going to happen. And whenever it does, you need to be prepared to do it. So the amount of resources we've thrown in to making sure we have the right people there is critical to making sure that people have good outcomes when something arises.
And when we talk about having good people and the right people, it's also, and this is a part of a greater conversation about the workplace, because that's what we do here on Work It, knowing roles and responsibilities. Because when there's an emergency and these professionals are running out to the field, everybody has to know their role and responsibility. It's just like the players. You got to know what play you're responsible for. That you can't want to play somebody else's play, and now you're neglecting your own play. You can't want to do somebody else's job and you're neglecting your own job. You have to know and respect your role and responsibility, because we're all working toward one goal. And when I hear you talk about all of those people with very, probably multiple degrees from all the Ivy League schools and probably, highly accomplished, the egos have to come down, because we all have to work toward one purpose here, and that's getting this player to safety.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
JC knows I do a lot of preaching, so that's just my moment. Okay, so JC, now I think this is a perfect segue into the work that you've been doing in the mental health space, because you talked about the impact on the players, right? That incident had earlier when the player passed out on the field, but also the impact on the families. So can you talk about the work that you've been doing in the mental health space?
Yeah, I think first, the players are people too. So the same issues I think we're seeing as a nation and as a world, mental health is a increasing issue, and it's getting better, but it's still a little taboo. And when you look at players who are in a macho business, there is that fear that, are they willing to be vulnerable enough to talk about what's going on? We've been lucky to have some big name players be willing to speak up publicly on their issues with mental health, which I think opens the door to other players to feel comfortable speaking about mental health as well. We try to keep resources available. So we have a mental health doctor in every facility. So players can go and speak away, not publicly or not with their team, knowing what's going on, but being able to speak to those mental health providers and make sure they're taken care of. It is something that you want to speak more about. And guys in the last year have gone through a lot, just like the country has. You start with COVID, where you're separated from your family, you can't see them, you're kind of cordoned off. I always used to love the season part of my job because everybody wanted to come visit. I had my family fly in, I had friends fly in, everybody was there. And then for those 2 years of COVID, you couldn't do that. So all those times where you were catching up with friends and seeing your family was taken away. And that was hard on guys. So you have that going on. You have this issue with commotio cordis on the field, where you're seeing one of your brothers go down and almost lose his life, which definitely wears on you. You've got injuries. There are things that hit you that you're dealing with. You're always kind of in this fight for your job too, which also is a strain on your mental health, where you're always worried, is this the end? Is this when I'm done? What do I do after? So I think the more people are willing to speak up about their struggles and what goes on is helpful. And a lot of that happens in the locker room too. I remember later in my career, we were in the offensive line room with all my teammates, and me and another one of the older players were talking about how nervous we got before games, even though we've been in the league for 8-9 years. And some of the young guys were taken aback because they thought it was just them. They thought like,
Oh,
wait, you guys
no.
get nervous? They were like, I thought I was the only one that got nervous. I didn't realize
Yeah.
everybody got nervous. So being able
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
open and honest with your own struggles, your anxieties, your stresses allows others to also feel like they're not alone in that and that they're not abnormal. They're actually normal. So I think those are also powerful moments, just being open and honest with your teammates and your friends to know what you're dealing with and what they're dealing with too.
I love that. And, we talked about the injuries. And if you're injured and you don't get to do what you love to do, and you are watching your comrades or your teammates or brothers, as you refer to them, um, out getting to do what they love and having a good time, that has an impact as well, I can imagine. And then for a lot of these young men, like many of us, even outside of professional sports, maybe we do have family responsibilities. And, people are relying on us. And if we can't play or we can't do what we do, then we have the additional stress of knowing that maybe we can't provide in the way that we need to provide, and that's a stressor, right?
And admittedly, I think this is something we're probably not doing enough. I think we're in the early years of what this ends up looking like 10 years from now. It's something we're really focused on because as we go team from team, every year we visit every locker room to see what the issues are. And mental health is one that comes up in almost every locker room of we need more resources for mental health. So that's something we're going to put our heads together as a union to figure out what guys need, what way we can help them. And I look at it as the same growth of the concussion protocols, where we were in 2011 when we first started talking about it to where we are now, 12 years later. It looks completely different, and we have a really great game plan of how to protect guys. I think it's the same thing. We're still in the early years of mental health of what we're providing. And I think a decade from now, it's going to be very extensive. And it's going to be a lot better set up to make sure there's no kind of loose ends or gaps in the providing of healthcare to those players.
Wonderful. So now it's time for a little bit of fun, JC. We've talked about, we get all serious about health and safety and terms and conditions of employment in the workplace, but I want to have a little fun with you. And I have some questions that I ask some of my guests. And so are you game?
Let's do it.
All right. All right. So knowing everything that you know now, what is something that you would have done differently in your career or your area of practice?
I probably would say get involved with the union sooner. It took me, I was not involved. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to hit?
Go ahead. He's doing it. I was hoping for something a little more introspective, but okay.
Okay, I'll hit you with a different one. I think when I became president, I was an alternate rep when I ran. So I'd never sat on the executive committee, had never been in those rooms. And I ran against 3 executive committee members, and I received the president's job. So I was walking into a room with a bunch of guys that had already been there before. And I'm the new kid on the block, and it's my job to lead them. Uh-huh. And I think something that I wish I would have done better in that instance, I think I kind of looked at, they didn't want me to lead them because I was new and they were the older ones.
Yeah.
And after 2 years, what I realized was I was letting them down. They actually did want me to step up and lead them more visibly and publicly. And I think it caused a strain on our executive committee that I didn't do well enough leading that group. And I think what I grew as my second term as president, I realized these guys do look at me as a leader and want me to be vocal and push them to be better too. And I think our executive committee is in a great place now. But that was something I look back at my presidency where I wish I stepped in and was the same leader I am now that I was when I started. Because I think we lost a year or so where they were waiting for me to take that lead with them. And I was kind of allowing everybody to be equals. And I think it hurt us. So that's something that really stands out to me as a leader that I wish I would have done better, is really step in, understanding I was new, but I'm still the president. I was elected to do a job. And it was my job to kind of be the voice among the leadership of our union.
Absolutely. That resonates with me because I have 2 words that are going to guide me through 2024, and that's confidence and courage. Right. And I think what you're talking about is getting in the role and being confident enough to know that I'm here to lead
Mhm.
and I need to step up, and the courage to be able to do that. But I want to extend some grace to you, JC, because we all have the times when we step into a new role and it's new. And we don't, and especially if we weren't sort of on the sidelines looking and knowing and part of the know, it's new. And so we need grace, everybody, as we grow into that role. Now, some folks don't want to give grace, and that's okay. I feel sorry for those people because, to me, they can't give grace, and so they don't receive grace, and the cycle just keeps going. They never get grace, and they never extend grace, and the reason why they never get grace is because they don't extend it to anybody else. So I want to say we're going to extend some grace because I think you're doing a bang up job.
I appreciate
And
that.
all right. So, what's your superpower?
My superpower. We're saying, what am I? What do I think I'm best at, or what's my
Yeah,
unique
what do you
trait?
think is like not necessarily best, but like for me, I always think in terms of comic books because I'm a Marvel Comics fan. So I always like there are certain characters that I look at, I'm like, what, that might be my superpower. Or maybe I have a different type of a superpower. Maybe because even the superheroes, maybe they don't know how to best use their superpower, but it is still, nevertheless, a superpower.
I'll go. Can I take this question in a different direction? I like what you said second about the superhero. The
Yes.
superhero that I connect with the most, I would say, is Batman, because I think his positives and his negatives I relate to the most. So, from a positive perspective, um, I think he believes in the greater good, believes in, even though in a very corrupt city, that he can make changes and make things better for everybody, believes that people can change and people can be better. So I relate a ton to that. Then you look at some of the negatives, secretive / has like a very tight circle. Like I think I'm probably a little slow to trust, and keep my circle very, very tight. So like I relate to that. And I would say kind of one in the middle that I relate to for kind of his personality is, being willing to be the bad guy. And that for a
Mm.
long time, people looked at him like he was in the wrong, being a vigilante, being somebody who
Mm-hmm.
was willing to stand up and fight against things that the city didn't like sometimes. And I look at that same
Mm.
way, where one of my, I guess, superpowers, to get to your first question, is I think I have a very strong tolerance to being disliked or the bad guy if I believe that in the end it's the right decision to be made and it might not be popular at the time. I'm okay being out on an island for a while fighting for what I think is right in the end.
You know, gosh, I think a lot of people needed to hear that. And sometimes when that we just did a show on integrity, right? And one of the things that we talked about on that show, well, it was a show on greater things, on values, but we talked about integrity. And one of the things that we mentioned is that when you disagree, say you're being asked to do something or to ignore something, right? And you disagree, you have to know why you're disagreeing, what the thing is, why you're disagreeing, right? If there's any data or something that supports your position, because some people are just disagreeable for the sake of being disagreeable, right? They don't want to do the work, but having some data that backs up. And then also being willing to live with the consequences of your decision if you decide to disagree or not execute whatever you've been asked to execute. And
Mm-hmm.
you just talked about being able to live with that. And
Yep.
that is very Batman, and that's very you. It's been very me. But that takes a certain type of person. And indeed, that is a superpower. That
Yep.
is a superpower. And finally, JC, finish this sentence. I was born a.
I'll go. This might be a weird word to choose, but a tinkerer. So I believe that anything. I guess my least favorite saying is, "This is how we've always done it." I hate it. I
Oh,
feel like there are always ways we can be better and do things better. And what I love about my current job is I have the ability to tinker with things we've done the same way forever and say, hey, I think there's a better way. And the other word that sometimes goes along with it is optimizer, but I think that has a connotation with making it, streamlined or efficient, and that's not always what I look for. I look for how to make it better. So that might be more fun. That might be, getting more involvement, and it might be a little slower, but we found a way to get more people engaged, which is great. And that's something I really love doing, is getting a problem or getting an issue and sitting down and being able to just tinker with it and just be like, okay, if we do it this way, we can get this person involved. If we do this way, we can get these more people involved, and we can take every issue. And I think everything can be improved on over time. And the worst thing you can do is just say, hey, this is what we've always done, so we're just going to keep doing it. And if you're never looking of how can we tinker with it a little bit, I think you're missing out on a lot of improvements.
This is why JC it has come to be one of my favorite people to talk to about the workplace and just about labor management issues and things like this. Just an outstanding individual. I mean, listen, I know him from a distance, but I feel like I know him. And the smile is genuine, always smiling. I really, truly appreciate you coming on Work It to educate me and our audience on the things that you are doing in your space as the president of the NFL Players Association. Thank you so much, JC.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
Awesome. Now, everybody, remember to like this video and subscribe. And please don't call JC to come on your picket line. Do not flood his email with we're going out on strike tomorrow, so we want JC to come, because he can't come to everybody's thing. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.